Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Board of Education for the Appleton Area School District. My name is Kay Eggert. I serve as the board president. First, roll call of fellow board members. Ed Ruffalo.
Here.
Chris Otter.
Here.
Jason Kolpak.
Here.
Nick Ross.
Here.
Peng Tao.
Here.
And James Bacon.
Here.
Okay. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kayla, are we good with our audio? Are we getting some feedback on our? We're good? Okay. All right, just as a reminder for anyone who may be joining us remotely, materials for tonight's meeting can be found on board docs, which can be linked to through the district website. And I am hearing some additional something in the background. Is that me talking again? I don't need to hear it myself. No. Okay, is that better? I think it's better. Great. All right. Sorry for that. Just a little audio technology glitch, we think. Okay. So I'm going to ask if board members have any request to remove any of the consent agenda items for separate consideration tonight.
Okay, I'd like to request to remove item 8C, the 24-25 school calendar from the consent agenda for separate consideration, please.
Okay, we'll move that down then to board business. Okay, anything else? Okay, then could I have a motion to approve the agenda with that change?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other questions or concerns? Then all in favor of the modified agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Then we're going to move on. At this time, we have an opportunity for public input. And we do have a number of people who have indicated they would like to address the board tonight. This is one of the ways that the board hears from constituents and interested citizens. We also do receive letters from individuals. We receive emails, but the public input at board meetings is an opportunity for people to speak firsthand. And for probably most of you have already been here for public input, but for just to make sure I'm clear, I just want to, there are few reminders that I need to share. And these are highlights from board policy 187 and its rule. First, individuals may speak for up to 3 minutes. And any individual who is speaking on behalf of a group and the group is present, then you would have 5 minutes to speak. We will have a timer running so that you can keep track of your allotted time, and we will need to, adhere to the time limits. But please know any comments that exceed your allotted time may be submitted to the board in writing as well. The board respectfully requests that speakers refrain from presenting comments that introduce complaints or concerns that are directed toward or identify individual staff members or individual students. Such personnel-related and student-related matters implicate a variety of rights that require careful attention, and so that those concerns need to be brought up in an alternate way, and it would be best to contact the Office of the Superintendent for help with such matters. And also, a speaker retains all liability for his or her comments and conduct. And we would request that all speech, anyone would refrain from using speech that is obscene, threatening, or defamatory. So, in addition, the Wisconsin Open Meetings Law allows only brief discussion of topics that are not listed on the agenda. Therefore, we may not be able to fully address comments that are shared tonight. So with that, and if you, first person who has signed up is Juliet Cole. So there would be a microphone at the podium. If you could just turn on that microphone, make sure the light is green. And then if you could just start by stating your name and the community, if you're an Appleton Area School District resident or another district.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Juliet Cole, and I'm a resident of Green Bay, and I have relationship with Appleton with African heritage. It is really exciting to see that Omolatis Academy will focus on students, particularly students of color and their needs, affirming them, validating them in school, and building bridges. Because I substitute teach for the past 5 years with Green Bay. And I see our children disengaged. I see them, and when they're speaking their languages, it's like, why are they speaking their language? That's who they are. From what I observe, different children are coming in representing who they are, but it seems like the school system expects them to put that by the door before they come in, because we all know, we all see that school culture is not necessarily their own culture. And school culture is mainstream culture. So there's nothing wrong. That's what they have to learn. But how can we include their culture? How can we include who they are in the classroom, in the school system? That will definitely improve their learning. We cannot deny the fact that there is a widening achievement gap, that students of color, Black, brown children, are not doing as well as their white counterparts, and students of poverty also, because there's a culture there. So knowing that African heritage is bringing this academy to this area, not only for Appleton, Green Bay, and the other areas will benefit from that. It's a pleasure. And I will say, please vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carolyn DeRoger. I may have mispronounced your last name, Carolyn. Oh, I gave two choices, so maybe you can state it and I'll listen to see what it is.
Okay, sorry, I was thinking it was on. Yeah.
You may
Sorry
start
about
again
that.
because anyone who is listening remotely would not have heard you.
Gotcha, okay. My name is Carolyn DesRosiers. I live in Appleton. I'd like to share my thoughts on the charter school proposal as a parent. And I'm just sharing my personal parent perspective tonight. My remarks don't represent any organizations which I'm affiliated with. I attended Appleton schools all my life and am a proud graduate of Appleton West and the Renaissance School for the Arts. A few years ago, when my family was house searching, we made a deliberate choice to buy a home in Appleton so our kids could attend Appleton schools and so we could be Appleton voters. My daughter is now a first grader at Horizons Elementary. I have followed the development of the Omalate Academy for many months and was present at the October 23rd school board meeting for the introductory presentation. I am continually impressed with African Heritage Inc.'s planning and design of the school and with their determination and tenacity to pursue federal funds when the state charter funding opportunity changed last year. I feel so proud that they were able to compete at the national level for federal funds to benefit our children right here in the Fox Valley. This is a rare and highly competitive funding opportunity. At the October 23rd meeting, Dr. Robbins cited some disturbing statistics on student outcomes, that in science, English language arts, social studies, and math, the disparities between white and Black student proficiency, and those gaps are getting bigger, not smaller, range from 22 to 45%. That's very concerning. These numbers tell us that systematically, Black students are not set up for success, despite the many positive steps that the Appleton School District has taken and continues to take to ensure success for every student every day. Systematic issues require big interventions, and the Omalate Academy is exactly that. Thinking about these disparities, I'm reminded of similar conversations the community was having 7 or 8 years ago regarding disparities in graduation rates between white and Black students, as much as a 20 to 25 point difference. Out of community concern and a great deal of work, including leadership from African Heritage, the STAR program was born, which hopefully folks know about. I'm not going to have time to describe it, but it's supporting Black students in their academic achievement. Last year, of the 25 seniors out of 364 scholars overall, 100% of the seniors graduated. That is an incredible turnaround, and it's been trending upward for many years. And really this shows us that these kinds of interventions work. Culturally specific, targeted supports work. And I shudder to think what the future of some of our seniors might look like if the STAR program had not happened. So tonight you have an opportunity like that to make a historic investment in our students that could change their lives, especially investing in students at an even younger age. So I implore you as a parent in the district, I'd love the option to send my kids to this school to vote yes.
Thank you, Carolyn. Our next speaker, Dr. Bola Delano. Pass. Okay. Our next speaker, Timothy Finley.
First off,
Can you make sure your microphone is on, okay?
First off, I want to thank God for y'all letting me speak. To me, it's an honor it's transparent at this time with the African school in the school district. I've been looking for this for a long time. I got 22 grandkids and 8 great-grand, and I'm ready to send them all to this school. And I just thank God that it's a chance to see this. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to see it and to grow with it. And my children are ready. It's time for a change, and I'm looking for it. I'm able, and I see I'm behind it 100%. And I know that y'all is ready to see a change. It's a change that's coming, and it's right here in front of y'all. And we all want to be a part of it. So my theory is I ain't gonna use my 3 minutes. It's time for y'all to say yes. Let's do it.
Thank you. Now, those are all the sheets that I have for sign up. That doesn't mean you still can't speak. Is there anyone else present who would like to share some thoughts or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Then I will, at this time, close public input and we will be, oh, you would like? Okay.
Good evening. Getting here this evening, a few minutes before the session start, a couple of us got together for some blessings. And it brought tears to my eyes. But it's tears because we know that we are here standing or sitting on the shoulders of our ancestors, but also of elders who waited, who advocated to see this present day. So this present day is a proposal that has been presented to the Appleton Area School District to establish a charter school called the Omolade Academy. It is a school that will provide access to equitable, quality opportunities. It is a school that is centered on us, the African-centered curriculum. And you may say, why now? Why not now? We come from a village of folks. Sitting right here are our elders. And I know they probably won't want me to say their ages, but I will tell you that they are probably between 68 to 75 years old. And they've been advocating for years for a school of this nature. So we are asking you, the board, to please, on behalf of all our children, American children in the Appleton Area School District, we're asking you to please approve our proposal to join with you, to partner with you in providing success for every student every day. On behalf of my elders, on behalf of the village, on behalf of Papa Dunlap, on behalf of Mama Tate, on behalf of Mama Awofeso, who have joined our ancestors, on behalf of our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, we ask that you please, please approve the establishment of the Omolade Academy in Appleton Area School District in Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last call. Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, I don't see any, so then I will close public input and we will move on. Our agenda. Let's see. So we'd be under now number 6, and we will have some reports. First, school and student services report. Dr. Harrison.
Good evening, everyone. With the third item being removed for separate consideration, school services, student services has 2 items for your consideration tonight as part of the superintendent's consent agenda. The first item is the alternative education and service curriculum and materials, which was presented during the November 13th board meeting by our alternative education team. And this is item 8A under our consent agenda. And then also we have the EL curriculum and materials adoption, which was presented by Amy Swick during our November 13th board meeting. And this is item 8B on the superintendent's consent agenda item. Both of these items are being recommended for approval tonight. Any questions from the board? All right, thank you.
And just to clarify, the voting on the school calendar or presentation of the school calendar is being pulled from the consent agenda, but we would still be having an opportunity to vote on it under board business. So we will still ask for the report on the student calendar. And would that be Sherry Garvey? Great. Are you able to come up and report? Is there a microphone at you? That's all right. Is there a microphone at your spot there? Wonderful. Thank you, Sherry.
All right, thank you. So the district leadership team has worked with a representative group of administrators in the calendar work group, which we do every year, to gather input on the proposed calendar for the 2024-25 school year. So the tentative calendar that we're bringing forward tonight, it's been established based on input from those representatives in that calendar work group. And reviewed by the district leadership team. And tonight is that board approval and is that final step in the process. So for the 24-25 school year, our start date would be September 3rd, 2024. For all elementary, middle school, and high school students. We would have staff return to school on Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. The plan that we're bringing forward to you tonight does include 9 professional development days, with 3 of those professional development days before school starts. So there's quite a few considerations that we have just for information for your consideration tonight when we have to develop the calendar. So there are 2 state requirements that we have for the calendar. One of those requirements has to do with the number of instructional minutes for elementary and middle school students and high school students. And then we also have that state requirement that we have to pay attention to in terms of that first day of school must be on or after September 1st. So we tried to do our calendar around this time for ample planning for families and staff with an intent to finalize that so that we can publicize that the board approved calendar for our families so they can start planning. We usually do that about 10 months in advance. So that's why we're here tonight. So just a couple of other things that you'll notice in the calendar, and I'll just move to questions in a little bit in terms of planning for enough surplus minutes to allow for inclement weather. The state statute was September 1st. We always really try to end our school year within that first week of June. We're planning for 9 professional development days, and sometimes depending upon the calendar, it's difficult to plan those monthly and where the calendar falls. So we had a few nuances this year with that calendar in terms of when to plan for those professional development days. And then we always pay attention to when we put our spring break. So those are just a few additional items, and now I'll just open it up for questions from the board.
I think just for clarification, I think it's confusing. So the educator contract, it's 9 professional development days, but then there are some additional days, contract days that would be used for other purposes. It might be some trainings. I mean, it's required time, but it's a little bit different than just professional development in fields of education. I mean, it could be training and other things related to positions, but not really considered professional development.
Correct. We
Okay.
have 188 professional contract days for our staff, our educators. And so you'll notice in August in the calendar that we have in front of you, we have staff orientation, professional development. The content of those days and whether it's training or staff orientation or professional development have not fully been determined, but it will be 6 total days at the beginning of the school year. So sometimes it's staff orientation and then professional development, and that's why it's differentiated on the calendar in August. But the days that are listed throughout the calendar that are listed for PD are professional development.
And then there are 2 days that are indicated with C, which would be, can you just touch on what those would be?
Again, So each fall in the twice a year in the first semester and the second semester, we build in what we call a compensation day. And that's that compensation day that's built into the calendar for our staff because of the parent teacher conferences and that additional time that they build into the time that they put in. So we build a compensation day in the fall for the fall conferences, and then we build one in the spring. So there's something in the fall and something in the spring. So in the calendar, the compensation day for our staff will be on Wednesday before Thanksgiving, which is what we have, which we did this year. And then we built the compensation day in before spring break in March. We did survey staff, not this year, but we have survey data from 2021-22 that our staff indicated that's where their preference was in terms of right before Thanksgiving or right before spring break. The calendar committee did talk on whether or not this year we would do another survey, in particular because we'll finish our first full year of full day PDs, and that's connected to the calendar. And so we'll probably do another survey in the spring after we go through an entire year of professional development days. So.
Any other? Do you want to go ahead?
I just have a couple of questions, some of them that you answered. A little bit about the process and the work group makeup. Does this calendar affect paraprofessionals or ASU who are working in the schools?
So we set our calendar for our educators, and then our paraprofessionals and ASU have a set amount of contracted days. And so once we set this calendar, we'll take a look at what days they would be expected to be working on those days. So their work days are dependent upon this calendar. So that starts the process of taking a look at when their start days were. So the example that I would give is we'll have to take a look at what our August days look like in terms of staff orientation and PD. So our educators would have those 6 days, but our paraprofessionals and some of our ASU would not have all of those 6 days as part of their work days.
Okay, I appreciate that information. And as I was kind of trying to compare last year's calendar with this year, the number of weeks in between when school ends and school starts again differs by 2 full weeks then for particularly for current staff members. So I guess you had mentioned surveying, but when I looked back at last year's item for consideration, we did have that as a piece that both staff and family surveys were taken into consideration. And I guess I just am wondering if you have any information that you could share that would, indicate how families are feeling about this calendar this year, and also staff members, just as this decision is quite a bit different actually from the calendar from last year. So I just want to make sure that we have all the input needed.
We do not have parent survey or staff survey, but it was a point of discussion with the calendar work group. And so in order to really make significant changes to the calendar, we felt we didn't have survey data to be able to do that, which is one of the reasons they talked about we do need to do another survey. We haven't typically surveyed every single year when we've done the calendar development. As I mentioned earlier, we have some nuances with building in a professional development day, and we had to consider whether or not we would put a professional development day in December or move it to the front of the calendar. Which when we moved it to the front of the calendar, it did bump up when staff would be returning. And so that was a point of discussion amongst the calendar work group, and felt that it was important to front load the professional development and those opportunities in the front. When we talk about the number of weeks, because we get out a little bit late this year with the calendar, And we go back a little bit earlier in the proposed calendar. Superintendent Harches took a look at what has that looked like in the last 4 to 5 years? And it ranges from 12 weeks in between to 11 to this year 10. And so it averages out to be about 11. This year is a little bit shorter, but depending upon the calendar next year, it might go back to 11 or even 12. So anywhere from 10 to 11 to 12, it's been averaging that. So we did look at that. The difficulty is if we would move a professional development day into December, that could be on December 23rd. That would really be the only option, to put a professional development day on the 23rd, that Monday before the winter break. Not ideal, probably not a day that would be engaged, difficult to be, but our families would still not have school. But we talked about, is that the best place? We value those professional development opportunities, and really talked about where is the best place for that professional development day, talking about at the end of the school year, at the beginning of the school year. By moving it to the front end, it did move it up a week. But it definitely was a lot of discussion amongst the calendar work group, which includes representatives from each of our levels of administrators, and then some representatives from the association, and then also the district leadership team in terms of what that looks like.
As Assistant Superintendent Garvey talked about, the priority is the student calendar. That's what this is. And our practice as a district has been to include educator days in here. Really, it doesn't have to be that way. We don't include any other employee groups in this calendar. So really, going forward, I think we should separate that out, because really what we're looking to approve here is the student school day calendar. And the survey data that we have gotten back from families is that they don't want to go into the second week of June. And so we have to start when the state says we can, on or after the 1st of September. And we know our families want to be done in the first Friday of June. So we've got to fit our 174 days in between those timeframes. So once that's completed, then we can look to add educator days, but they can be separated out from the student calendar. The summer has been, as Sherry talked about, it's been 11 weeks of full weeks vacation, or time off, I should say. But because the late Labor Day this year pushed the start of school back, so this past summer was 12 weeks off. To balance that out, there can only be 10 weeks off next summer, because the school year gets out so late this year. We get out, I believe it's let me look at the June date, it's the 7th of June. So the 7th of June will be the latest we will get out, and then the calendar bumps forward a week, and then we get out earlier in June in the next couple of years. Then it moves back. So we'll have this same issue every 7 years. So that's kind of where we are. If we want to approve the calendar as is, knowing that we can come back and have further discussion around the educator days, but it's really important for us to get the student calendar approved, so families, we can start publishing it as such. The educator days, we can move around as we need to, if those days are of concern.
I guess I would agree to looking at the student days. I think it was a little bit confusing here, because in the past we have approved a calendar that included the teacher days or educator days. So I understand the importance of approving a calendar for students, but I am concerned about this calendar, because it does, if it particularly if it affects paraprofessionals as well, because many of our teachers and many of our paraprofessionals work during the summer to increase their income. So I'm concerned about that, and I am concerned about what the perception of staff and parents are in a calendar like this. So I hope that we will look at surveying in the future so that we have additional information, especially when it's, I mean, this is for returning teachers, they will come for 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, have Friday off, and then the next week, 4 days and Friday off. And I just wonder if that's what most would agree is, you know, something that they would.
Do you have a suggestion on where that day could go? Because that's been our struggle. Again, it can't replace a student day because we need those student minutes to count. And so it would have to go somewhere where there's currently not school.
Were there other proposals from the committee at all that were considered?
There were a couple of different options, as I mentioned earlier. One option that was brought forward would be to have that professional development day be December 23rd. And another option would be to bump a professional development day into that second week of June, which would be June 9th. And so those were the other, you know, we really don't have a lot of options, but those were the two options that we discussed. And as we thought about what are the opportunities and where are we going to provide some professional development, knowing some of the different trainings and different changes that are going to happen. It was, we agreed that front loading it and bringing it to the front end of the calendar would allow for some of that professional development to happen to launch the school year for some of those things. We did get some feedback just from the last calendar. Last year's calendar had 5 straight days. And we did get a little bit of, it's not quantitative data, it's more qualitative, just feedback from staff that 5 days in a row is a lot. Seemed a little bit overwhelming. And so there was some thinking that a slower start, a more soft landing of shorter week, then the following week is 4 days. This past year, we did work on that. We did have a contracted day on that Friday before Labor Day. So this removes that. And so there's a couple of different things that we considered when we moved it to the front end.
Would we consider approving a calendar, a student calendar, and then possibly looking at other options for the educator piece?
I think we can do it one of two ways. Certainly could. I don't think we would want to approve this as is then. We would want to bring back a different calendar at the next board meeting in December. That is just the student calendar. Or this could be approved knowing that there may be a change in just the one educator day out of the calendar. So 2 options there, I guess.
Well, I'm wondering, could we approve the student calendar, knowing that the way this is formatted, people would just have to ignore PD and.
Yes, and
I
when we
mean,
publish a
yeah.
calendar for families, we publish it without all of that detail. So we do publish a user-friendly calendar for families when we do.
Well, any other thoughts? Right now, this item is pulled from the superintendent consent agenda and would be taken up separately under board business. So we can continue the discussion at that time, or if you want to add some more discussion right now or ask questions right now.
I guess I would say, I think it would be, if we can approve the student calendar tonight, or if we can vote on that tonight, I would support doing that. There's a way to, like, as was discussed, just so, especially knowing that families and students won't be seeing calendar that we're looking at right now. Just for that planning piece for families.
Any other comments from board members? Or questions? Anything else you wanted to share? Okay. All right. Chris, do you have any other questions? Go ahead.
If we approve the student calendar, we would come back to looking at the educator piece then at another board meeting.
Yes, we can do that.
I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. We are going to move on now to personnel services update. Julie King.
Good evening. Personnel Services has 2 items for the board's consideration on the superintendent's consent agenda. Those are items 8D and E. They consist of 2 new educator hires, one here in December and one in January for an early retirement, and then 1 educator contract change. Are there any questions on these 2 items?
I don't see any in the boardroom.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then we will move to the board's consent agenda, which is just 1 set of meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. Thank you. All right, roll call, please, Kayla.
Aye.
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 James Bacon,
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, then we'll move to the superintendent's consent agenda. Mr. Hartjes.
The superintendent's consent agenda includes 4 items for your consideration. The first 2 items, 8A and B, were reported on by Dr. Steve Harrison during the school services report, and were also items for discussion at our last board meeting. And items 8D and E were just reported on by Julie King during her personnel services update, and I recommend approval of these 4 items under number 8.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as stated. Superintendent.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please, Kayla.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
James Bacon,
Aye. Aye.
Okay, then we're going to move to now reports. School and Student Services Report, ELA 7 curriculum and materials update. Dr. Harrison and Kelly, welcome.
Joined tonight by Kelly Leopold, who is our secondary director of humanities in the Appleton Area School District. And tonight we have an item of information for you relating to 7th grade ELA and humanities courses with respect to proposed supplemental materials in which we would be seeking board approval for implementation of these materials. Again, tonight, this is an informational item, and so this would be coming back to you in 2 weeks as an item for consideration.
Good evening. So you will notice in the keywords and key times, the why our middle school ELA department is looking for approval of this novel, and I'll actually be coming back relatively shortly with some other titles for you. What I've included here are really our policy 361.1 for educational materials selection. And part of our English program evaluation last year, our ELA work group discussed looking for new titles, new diverse titles that really offer different voices, different perspectives for our students. And so we've been doing some work with the DEI team and our cultural advisors, STAR coordinators, ELA teachers, and social studies teachers to identify some different novels. As I mentioned, we put into place a process where I will be coming to you potentially twice a year with titles. Prior to that process being put in place with our ELA CSS team, Kaleidoscope Academy had come forward with this title. So that's why this is separate from the others. But this is a historical fiction novel, Prisoner B3087 by Alan Gratz, that follows a young Jewish boy through the Holocaust. And I do want to reiterate the importance of Act 30 with Wisconsin DPI, that we do teach the Holocaust once during grades 5 through 8 and once during grades 9 through 12. So this is a unit, a European unit that brings in narrative writing and history as the humanities courses do at Kaleidoscope Academy. So they had come forth asking for this to be a full class read rather than an option within their literary circles or literature circles. They've been doing that for a number of years and finding great success, great engagement, and students really wanting to read this. And so that is through that feedback, they felt this would be better as a full class read. We did seek public input for the 30 days. We received no written or electronic feedback for or against. And really, as I mentioned, this instruction will benefit our students through, hearing that variety of voices, that deep understanding. It's really another piece to our ELA program evaluation is using high leverage strategies. And one of those is interactive read alouds. And so through that process, that actually our teachers started their PD in September on that, our secondary teachers did. It's alive and well at the elementary level, but there tends to be a drop off in middle school and high school reading aloud to students. And there really is something behind that in their understanding. And so the teachers are excited to try these new strategies and get those students engaged and offer them appropriate feedback. You'll also notice in the keywords and key times under the what section, I did include specifically how Kaleidoscope has used this previously. The students write an adapted narrative from a victim or survivor's point of view. They read poetry written by children from and I might mispronounce this, Terezin concentration camp, which is north of Prague in the Czech Republic. And they also create a manifesto after learning about Anne Frank. So it is a multifaceted, at length unit that they do coming up. So they are very excited about this being a full class read if given approval. Are there any? Oh, and I'm sorry, I always forget the cost. At this time, there is no cost. Kaleidoscope Academy has 120 copies at their school. And it's also available on Sora, which we purchased through our common school funds. So students can read that electronically as well. If we do need to purchase more books, I already have that budgeted within my humanities account for new purchases of books. We would be separate. Any questions?
I just want to say that I appreciate this as an example of a collaboration between a charter school, Kaleidoscope Academy, and general education or neighborhood schools. So I'll just leave it. But yeah, great collaboration there, and how all of our students benefit from having charter schools.
So Kelly had a chance to read through some of the excerpts of this, and happy to hear we've taught it before. There are some truly uplifting moments in these books, and the ability of the human spirit to overcome great challenges and horrors, but there's also some very, very heavy scenes without a doubt. And certainly we don't want to shy away from those. It is our history, but when you've taught it in the past, the seventh, especially at the 7th grade level, have any of our students had difficulty handling that kind of information? And how are our teachers prepared to deal with that, particularly as we roll this out to a larger audience?
An excellent question. So previously, in all honesty, that was not shared with me if there were problems in the past, but I can tell you a big piece to the work that's being done right now is that lesson design, that assessment, that engagement, the classroom discussions that will take place. And when we think about interactive read alouds, the most important part to those are reading those sections. Often we focus more on reading the text that might be more difficult lexile wise, because when the students are reading independently, right, we're going to be able to scaffold it better when we're doing it as a full class read. And I would think the same would hold true here with these difficult topics. I would like to, I guess I would be proposing to them based on your question that they work with their guidance team. That's a resource at their site, as well as perhaps a psychologist. Just like I mentioned, we work with the DEI team, right? We need to use our resources within district to prepare for that. But that's an excellent question. One that they had not shared with me, that then maybe because it was choice, it might prove differently. I don't know.
What made me think of that was when my kids were going through school, both my son and daughter, they read Night, of course, very much in the same thematic. I remember that the school notifying us ahead of time that they're going to be reading this just to help prepare the families. I think you could opt out if you want to. You always have that option, but it was more just in preparing so that the questions from your students when they were coming home, you would know where those are coming from. I wonder if that might be a strategy as well.
Absolutely. That's one that's already in place. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. So this will be back on the agenda in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to then move to board business. And the first item listed is Omalade Academy contract, school contract. And I'm just going to get back to my agenda. Trying to jump ahead here. So we are well aware that this is a proposal that now the board has had access to and has had discussion about and presentations about for several times. And we've had an opportunity to ask questions a number of times. Tonight or today, what was included in tonight's agenda is now the updated contract proposal. I think at the last time there were some questions, and so there were some edits and some changes made. So at this time, I think first I'm going to ask if anyone has any additional questions regarding that contract, because there were some edits that were made, and then we can enter into consideration.
I have just one question that may be mostly for Greg. There's a lot that's going to have to happen between the approval and September 2024. And our elementary school resources are already quite committed with Sandy Slope and all the rest. So I just want to make sure we're good partners. What is your thought on who's going to take the lead on this from our side? Because I think everybody in the elementary level has a lot on their plate already, number one. And number two is because the time frame is short, if for some reason circumstances beyond anyone's control, we don't make that September 2024, you have to consider all contingency. Does that invalidate the rest of the grant? Or if something like that were to happen, could we open 2025 and not lose the grant from the US Department of Education?
Let me start with answering the first part of your question about staff, who internally. Although the superintendent probably in the past hasn't been that involved with charter school development. So it's a passion area for me because I've been a principal of charter schools, started a charter school. Assistant Superintendent Ebony Grice is here. She also has experience with charter schools, and again, we could have others be involved, but I think the two of us are probably going to be the most involved on the front end. A second piece that African Heritage Incorporated has going for them is the grant dollars. They're more substantial than we've ever dealt with. So if there are areas where we don't feel like we as a school district have personnel that can put time towards the further development of the school, African Heritage Inc. will be able to pay contractors, and that's what for the most part they intend to do. So although the timeline is tight, I don't see any reason why, if this is approved tonight, our partnership can't have the school ready for the first day of school. I think the biggest thing we have to do is to look to promote to families. And so we did hear from one or two tonight, but we obviously will want to be able to open ideally with 80 to 100 students in 4 grades in fall. If we weren't there, if we were to just open with kindergarten, first grade next fall, I think that would be reasonable as well. So really everything that we control, I don't believe I have any concerns with. It's the one thing that's out of our control is, will families enroll students? And that is, we have to wait and see always with charter schools.
So you sound quite confident that you have the resources to make this happen, according to the tension.
Yeah, we have the resources and the experience. We successfully run 13 charter schools now. And so we know how to start a charter school. We know what needs to be done. In fact, already jotted some notes down. Another thing will be a governance board. I think it will be important for us to work with African Heritage Incorporated and a governance board that is well-rounded in terms of backgrounds of those serving on the governance board. So if approved, most likely we'll have to work, get a press release out soon. I think African Heritage Inc. would like to be at the charter school fair on Saturday. So those pieces will be put in place immediately.
Thank you, Greg. That's a great answer.
Had a question regarding the change that was made on 6A methods of measuring student progress. It was changed from the Omalati Academy will score at or above the district average in reading and in math. And now it says it will score at or above the district average for the comparable demographic group. And I'm just wondering if someone might be able to share a little bit about that change and what that might mean.
So I'll start and then I'll ask Dr. Albrandt to speak to it as well. It came out of a comment from a board member at the last meeting that asked the question of, is that fair to expect that the achievement level is going to be at the district average and not at the district average for the demographics of the students? And it's really a valid question for all of our charter schools. It just perhaps has never been brought up before. And so that's where the question generated from. Dr. Brandt, anything to add?
Thank you.
So just to then in the second year, I mean, that's just then for the first year, because then the longitudinal goals would go into place. I mean, because then it seems to switch over to the academy will score at or above the district average in reading after one full academic. Wait. Well, I don't know. I do believe that we all know what the intent is. And sometimes articulated in language that, number one, this is something that, we're supposed to agree to. It's a contract. And maybe that's why I'm just wanting to make sure that I'm understanding the language. But I mean, the intent is that the students at Omalate Academy are going to do better there than they're doing in the neighborhood schools. I mean, that's the intent. That's the goal. I'm seeing heads shaking. So however that can be articulated, makes sense. I'm not sure that this actually articulates it, but I
I understand what you're saying, Kay. But I think we understand the intent, so as long as the intent is there, I can agree to that.
any other actually I have one. I'm just going to ask for if people would be comfortable with an edit on page 3, under the description of the program, educational program. So page 3, about halfway down, towards the end of in section A, towards the end of that, says all these pedagogies are meant to view students of color from a strength-based perspective. The fact that the school is open to all students, would it be accurate to say that all these pedagogies are meant to view students from a strength-based perspective? Because we're not assuming that only students of color are going to be attending Omalate Academy.
Yes.
And so I'm just,
Only put that out there based on what research has shown. Okay, but it's fine. We can do it.
I just so that we are consistent with that the school is open to all students. But I would ask if okay. You fine with that?
And so what would happen is that revision would be made. And ultimately, when the contract is signed, the signed contract would be the revised that has that taken out. But it could still be approved this evening with the edit that you requested.
I just want to make a comment. On the scoring piece of it, I don't know where this comment is going to live, but it lives to our discussion last week or the 2 weeks before. I don't know. Whenever Steve was talking to us about the testing pieces, and I was talking about how, like, it's a moot point that these tests that we do in any of our schools actually is giving us information, but it's not supposed to be comparing schools from one district to the other because you're not looking at the same population. So my comment is, because of that, moving forward on our charter school contracts, should we be even including that kind of a scoring language? To my comment last time we met, that I significantly have seen that charter schools have scored significantly lower than every district that they are in, actually, whether it is in Wisconsin or in Minnesota. And I believe our charter schools at this moment, currently in our district, do probably score lower, because to Steve's point that he had shared with us was that they actually don't teach the same kinds of curriculums that the public schools do, essentially, if I'm hearing what he said. So they're not teaching the students to actually test on those tests that we're doing, or the state's telling us to do, right? And so I don't know where this comment is going to live, but I just wanted to share that as a comment. While I have it in my head.
And probably, I'm just going to assume, Dr. Brandt, that the reason that there's language in these contracts about how to measure student success is because the contract is, someone needs to be accountable for monitoring how this, schools are doing. Can you just come on up and provide a little background?
I mean,
or
I get that part. My thing is, if there's a way for us to measure success, what is that way? If the testing that we're talking about actually is always about that, we shouldn't do comparisons, because I think Steve in our work session has said, we're not doing apples to apples. It's clearly apples to oranges, to grapes, to bananas, to whatever fruits there are in the kitchen that we're gonna eat. And it's not the same. So I think I like the language in there, but I'm just saying, is there a different way to do measuring of success in schools, generally, in general? It doesn't have to be just charter schools only.
Yeah, the short answer is absolutely yes. But historically, when Appleton was starting to develop more and more charter schools is when the contract template came around. And a state requirement of charter schools is to kind of the philosophy of the charter schools is that you're given greater autonomy to kind of do your own thing, but you're held to be accountable to be getting results. And I think where you're getting at is, well, what does that mean? What is successful results? Because again, it kind of goes back to the population you're serving. And, you know, we maybe have put all the eggs in the same basket, so to speak, because it's maybe the easiest way to do things, because that's what the state looks at and has collected as data in the past. And we can definitely differentiate between schools and how we determine success. But then as a board, you have to kind of bear in mind that you may have 13 or 14 or 15 charter schools in the future with, you know, a dozen different ways to measure success. So, you know, that can be very difficult too in terms of trying to determine success or not.
So there are the test results, then there's the rest of the story, which is what we talk about for all of our
Absolutely. I
schools.
mean,
And that applies to the charter schools as well as our neighborhood schools.
absolutely. You know, to me, looking at like a high school, the high school charters is a perfect example because the students, when let's say they start ninth grade, already have a track record for the past 8 or 9 years. Well, if a student is attending a charter high school and maybe is not getting great letter grades, but they're showing up every day or almost every day when, you know, all through middle school, they were truant. Is that success? Because now they're showing up and participating at least.
My last comment is just because it was related to the article that we had talked about that I had brought up when we were in our work session on parent choice vouchers. And the article's talking about how private schools are doing much more better than public schools. And so that's why. And so I think that it's a much larger conversation that we have at this moment, but I just wanted to bring it up to see where this comment is going to live, and maybe perhaps we can have another fruitful conversation about it with Steve at some other point.
Sounds good. Any other comments from board members? Go ahead.
This one, and that involves, it's under part 9, faculty qualifications. Classroom teachers will be hired with the understanding that they will need to acquire the necessary knowledge. We will have some staff members who will be shared between multiple schools, multiple sites. And so I just coupled with A and E that the Omalati Academy and principal have discretion on which AASD meetings and trainings teachers will attend, with the exception of mandatory meetings and trainings. I'm hoping that there's some give and take there because some of the staff will be shared and will be between multiple buildings. They may not be able to attend all of the staff developments or the acquiring the knowledge that maybe the classroom teachers will have, just because they won't have the amount of time necessary since they'll be split between buildings and have different responsibilities. So I just, because part of it was in the gray and part of it was in the white, I just wanted to make sure that there is some sort of way that, you know, that the two sites or that the individuals involved who are supervising those staff will be able to work out an agreement, so staff members aren't feeling like they are kind of in the middle of having to participate in multiple areas.
I would just add that that's a historical challenge for staff with all of the charters, you know, because they're shared staff with a lot of charters. And so they do have to kind of navigate on professional development days, which parts do I attend, maybe a district staff development versus something that's specific for a charter model. And to my knowledge, that hasn't been a challenge in terms of people figuring out where their best use of time is. And I would say, if there's a requirement for additional training for Amalade staff, even if the shared staff, with these initial years getting started, that's where the grant money could pay folks if they wanted to put in additional time and maybe be able to participate in both.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
And I just want to add just two examples. Montessori requires specific training. So we have Montessori staff that have had to go through training outside of the Appleton Area School District, and then also ATEC. To teach a Project Lead the Way course, the teachers have to go through Project Lead the Way training. So we have some precedent that's been set and the compensation that goes with it. So as Dr. Brandt said, there are dollars available. But yeah, absolutely, a principal has to recognize that staff members can't be in two places at once. So if there's two different staff developments, they have to make a choice, which one's going to be most valuable for them.
And I was thinking too, in terms of special education staff or school psychologists, social workers, and that sort of thing. So just, it sounds like you have that all considered already. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Interact with students are aware of these challenges and work hard to address them. And I know that work will and should continue. And I see no harm in adding another strategy, Omalade Academy. And I see only the exciting potential for collaboration and knowledge sharing with the rest of the district, and most importantly, improved outcomes for our students. And I see the opportunity for our district as, again, I'm quoting you a lot tonight, Dr. Robbins, but I see the opportunity for us to become a beacon in the region. I see families of all backgrounds being drawn to our district because of the mere existence of Omalade Academy, even if they will not enroll their students in the school. I see diverse educators choosing to work in AASD because of Omolade, even if they will not teach at that school specifically. I see this because hosting and partnering with Omolade demonstrates that we as a district take action and that we walk the walk, that we will actually do the work to address these gaps instead of just paying lip service to the issue. Finally, the curriculum and programming of Omolade will be Black and African American centered, not exclusive. And I've heard from district staff, community members, and AASD families, again, of all backgrounds, that they're excited about this opportunity. And I am too. And I hope my colleagues will join me in voting to approve. Thank you.
Are you ready for a motion, Kay?
I'm just gonna ask if anyone would make
I
a
would
motion.
I would very much appreciate making a motion to approve the African Heritage Inc. contract as revised to authorize the Omolade Academy.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion or questions, comments? Okay, seeing none. Roll call. Aye.
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 James Bacon.
Aye.
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 Okay. Good work. More to go. Now the work starts, perhaps. All right, then with that, we will, moving on. Next, we have a monitoring report, R 2.11, which is our monitoring of English language art results policy. We had discussed this at the November 15th work session. And is there a motion to approve the monitoring report as it was presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion or residual questions? Okay. See none, roll call.
Aye.
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 James Bacon.
Aye.
Okay, the next monitoring report, 2.1.2, mathematics. Again, this was presented and discussed at the November 15th work session. Is there a motion to approve as it was presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, one last time. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, roll call, Kayla.
Aye.
James Bacon.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, next, policy 131, this was a revision. We talked about this the last time. It's a policy regarding school board elections. And it's important that we made some revisions because of filing deadlines for individuals who may want to run for the school board. So we talked about this. It's the second reading of it or second presentation of it. Any discussion? Clarification? If not, then can I have a motion to approve this revised board policy?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Then roll call, please.
Aye.
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 James Bacon,
Aye.
Okay, then policy 672, Mr. Harges.
So policy 672 is related to OE6. And when we were monitoring OE6, there were some revisions that we wanted to make, but we can't make revisions to OE6 without making revisions to the purchasing policy, which it's based on. So this item was brought as an item of information last meeting. It's here today as an action item. So if you have any questions about it, Holly Burr is available to answer any questions about this item E, policy 672.
I'll make a motion to approve policy 672.
Second.
Okay. One last time, any questions? Okay, seeing none. Roll call, please, Kayla.
Aye.
Aye.
James Bacon,
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, now OE6.
So OE6, you last saw these potential revisions this summer when we were monitoring. So this is an item of information only, so that you have an opportunity to ask questions about it tonight. It will be brought back in 3 weeks at the next board meeting. And so Holly Burr is here to give you kind of an overview of those changes.
Thanks, Greg. So basically what we did is took the changes that we made in the policy that you just approved, 672, and applied them to the OE6. So it is 6.2 and 6.3, where we changed some language to reflect small and micro purchases and large purchases, and then the dollar amount of a large purchase, the 250,000. But kind of in a nutshell, that's the changes.
I thought it all looked, well done. And I know it was some additional work to first revise the purchasing policy, but in the long run, I think was work that had to be done, and it was good. So I think it's good. Anyone have any other comments? Otherwise, motion to approve the changes. Wait, we're not going to approve this tonight. Never mind. So this was the first time we're seeing it. It'll come back at the next meeting for approval.
I just have one minor nit to pick.
Yeah.
I was just, as reading through this, I found myself curious, what are the definitions of micro and small purchases? I'm wondering if it would, since we define in the OE what the large purchase limit is, if it would make sense to quantify the micro and small purchases as well. I don't know if that makes a difference.
If you kind of have to refer back to the policy 672, and it is actually in part of, it's not on page 1, it's on page 2 of that, under where it says the rule. And in there, we talk about acceptable methods of procurement. And in those, we define the micro purchases as $10,000 or less, and then small purchases are then $10,000 to $250,000.
And so I guess my point is, we don't define it in number 2, but we do define it in number 3. So would it make sense to not define it in number 3 or to also define it in number 2? If we expect those numbers to change if we have to update the policy, right? So if the micro goes to 15 or 20 or whatever, if we update the policy, then we don't have to come back and update the OE. And if the large purchase number changes over time, we don't have to come back and update the OE.
that would make sense. And to that point, then I would just prefer to remove the numbers from the OE.
Would you though, if you remove the numbers from the monitoring or from then what I think we don't want to lose track of, this is where it gets a little confusing because we have our coherent governance policies and then we just have our district policies. And so right now we're using definitions. We updated a district policy and we're using that as the basis for the coherent governance policy. I think that maybe it's just a reference to, see district policy 672 or something, somehow so that people know where the definitions are.
Yeah, I agree that whatever documentation we include to validate that we've met this should include reference to 672. So board members don't have to always look up, okay, where is it that I need to check for sure that this has been monitored? I think we can include that in that documentation.
So Jason, would that satisfy?
So my suggestion would be that we remove the language that says in excess of $250,000 and change the language that says established purchasing procedures to reference the actual policy. That way, if the policy changes, we don't have to update the operating expectation to reflect those changes every single time.
Okay, can you just tell me which page you're on? In OE6, please.
So the superintendent will, number 3, assure that all large purchases in excess of $250,000, a large purchase is defined in the policy as in excess of $250,000. So that language is extraneous. And then the last line says established purchasing procedures. Rather than established purchasing procedures, I would simply reference the specific policy in that line. And then a similar change would need to be made in number 2 to replace established purchasing policies and procedures with a reference to the actual policy that defines those limits.
Okay, because right now the interpretation is saying that this is established purchasing policy and procedures means policy 672. And so you're saying just
Be more specific.
okay. Is that noted? You're good with that?
Mark or Holly. So along with Holly, Mark Hansel obviously worked on a lot of this, and so did Scott Werfall. So those are the departments that primarily are making the large purchases. So looks like Mark's okay with it. Holly, any concerns?
No, I don't have any concerns with it, Greg. That's fine. That was the intent of doing it anyways, just to reference back to the 672 policy. So if we want to just state that way, I'm on board.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question that is probably coming out of pure ignorance, so I apologize, but is this conflicting with any sort of state law around purchasing, if there even exists that? If there even is anything like that? Like certain, purchases of a certain amount need to have bids, this, that, and the other thing.
I actually think that there's a proposed bill in the legislature right now that's addressing required bids of a certain level, but I can't tell you. It's bills that is trying to get a hearing, I think.
So Holly, can you speak to the resources you used? I know our auditors have a number that they use. Anything else that you used as a resource?
So the 250,000 was a number that we pulled from the auditors. So they're familiar with that. We also looked at the federal guidelines and the state guidelines, and also the WASB policies. And there are no minimum dollar requirements. It's pretty much whatever individual boards are comfortable with. And it doesn't have to be a dollar amount. It could be specific purchases, which most of the big ones are covered other places. And I'll just give you a for instance, is real estate. As a for instance, we would not purchase real estate without board approval. So it can be, listed as things like that versus a dollar amount as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion on this? Okay. It'll come back in 2 weeks with some edits. Great. Okay, we're going to move on to G, the policy 522.1, drug-free workplace.
Yeah, I'll give a quick intro. So just as a reminder, we reached out to WASB last spring to have them analyze all of our district policies, which is a service that they provide. And so they did that, and they call it a quick review. And then they gave us direction on which policies are mandatory that we either update or have to create, which ones are critical, and then which ones just need to be done over time because they're a little bit out of date. So over the next several months, we're going to be bringing you several policies to update. We'll always bring them as an item for discussion, which is what this is tonight, an item for discussion, and then it'll come back at the next board meeting for your approval.
And Mark Hansel worked with me. We worked in collaboration on this policy, so chime in if there's anything here. So what we have for you this evening is 523.11. I would say, due to some questions that we've received, initially it was our understanding that 523.11 replaces 522.1, drug-free workplace, because there's such significant overlap. So there's kind of two ways we can go with it. We can either put it all in one policy, or we can have two separate policies. So what we would be bringing back the next time that we come, we would ask you to consider the employee alcohol and drug testing, the 523.11 for any questions this evening. And we would bring back a revision to 522.1, not replacing, but a revision to. So in further review, what we believe would be 522.1 would explain what the policy is. 523.11, which was a policy we did not have before, really talks about how it will be implemented through the testing, the alcohol and the drug testing, even though there are very similar references to both.
Essentially 522.1 is saying that we will have a drug-free workplace, and 523.11 is specifying how we can test if we feel as though that's being violated. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think though that we are required to still have the 522.1 for anyone getting federal grant funds. And that's where I was confused, because all of 522.1 was crossed off, and so, but you're going to come back with, it's not going to replace, this 523 is not going to.
Correct, and to that point,
Okay.
In 523.11, the federal law and regulations is where it talks about federal grant. So it was referenced within this policy, the 523.11. But to that point, we will bring back a drug-free workplace 522.1, the one that's currently read, as a revised document. And this is your first review of 523.1.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Or- okay.
Absolutely.
Just want to make sure you're done your presentation. The third paragraph under employee drug and alcohol testing. So we talk about reasonable suspicion to require testing may not be based on an employee's lawful use of a product off premises. So somebody can't come to us and say, I saw so-and-so at a bar Friday night and they were drinking and maybe they even appeared a little overserved. That's not our concern.
Correct.
I don't understand the second half of that paragraph. I'm not clear what we're trying to get to. Unless such has a legally sufficient connection or nexus. Could you expand on that and help me understand what that means?
So if that carried through, Ed, into responsibility, then that would play a part, right? So in your example, maybe someone seemed a little overserved on a Friday night. If they then went and worked the Friday night football game, we would have an issue with that. So they can be connected, but we're not after the outside of the workplace activities unless they come back into the workplace.
And there's pretty clear law in regards to what is lawful and unlawful use. So really, it's if somebody does partake prior to coming into work, or if that observation at the time that they're at work. And really, it's all those things coming together, that there's documentation or suspicion, because there's different odors, behaviors, some type of suspicion at that point. In order to tie it together, at that point, we can send for testing.
So here's my favorite question related to cannabis use. We are an island of states that's legal, and it's not legal in Wisconsin. It's still not legal from a federal standpoint. Somebody travels outside the state of Wisconsin to a state where it is legal to do that, and they imbibe and they use it, and they come back and they fail a random drug test. How are we dealing with that?
We do not have random drug testing.
Yeah, why
not? That is not part of the policy that was being suggested, nor has it been the district practice.
We don't do random drug testing. If one of your employees was injured, oftentimes it's standard practice to do a drug test. And if we do a drug test and they come back positive, because unfortunately, it's always challenging with marijuana use because it can stay so long after the effects are cleared. And they say, yeah, but I did that in Colorado, or I was gone over the weekend and I was in Michigan. How are you dealing with that, Mark?
We haven't had to deal with that, so as we have this currently, we're only testing on suspicion. We're not testing post-injury or post-accident. We're only testing on suspicion. So if there were an accident or an injury and we had reasonable suspicion that it was caused because of drugs or alcohol, then we would proceed with the testing. Is that accurate, Julie?
That's accurate.
So you're telling me if somebody was injured in the course of work, we don't drug test as a matter of course? We only do that on the suspicion.
For workers' comp?
Yeah, just
Injury, we do not drug test for workers' comp injury.
okay. Is that according to a WASB direction? I just know that's very common practice in other industries.
Would have to defer to Holly if she's on about workers' comp, or Greg from your history from workers' comp. It has not been a practice, I know.
Right, it's not been in my experience with 3 different workers' comp insurance carriers, none recommended to us. A lot of recommendations around prevention of injuries, but nothing around testing after an injury occurred.
Thank you.
The language from this policy is boilerplate from WASB, or?
It's very close to WASB. The piece that would not be included, and this may be part of what Ed is talking about, is there was reference to CDL. We don't require CDL for any of our positions, so that would be the Department of Transportation regulations where some of these factors come in. So that was taken.
And then if I'm reading this correctly, there's some discretion built into it as well. It sounds like in the consequences section, besides applicable laws and law enforcement involvement, there's some discretion built into it for the districts that might cover some of the kind of edge cases that Ed was bringing up.
I had similar thoughts about this that Ed was asking about in his first question. And I'm just making sure I'm understanding. So like another example of that legally sufficient connection or nexus to the employee's work-related responsibilities. The thing that popped into my head was like an AASD staff person chaperoning students like overnight in a hotel. Like that could potentially be another example of where this might come.
Yes, that would be on the clock for AASD, that would apply.
And also Ed brings up good questions regarding like cannabis use, and like you talked about it in the context of like an injury where that person might get tested. But I'm wondering now, I may like not think anyone should share this type of thing on social media, but if like, for example, if a staff person shared something indicating cannabis use, but it was in a place where it was legal, would that be an issue?
I think if you move up a paragraph, Nick, to item 2, that may help this discussion. Where it says reasonably occurring at the same time. So we have to have, according to how we have this phrased, we would have to have suspicion of you being under the influence reasonably at the same time that you had school district obligations, right? So you were either at work or chaperoning a field trip, whatever it was, and that you were using an illegal substance or a legal substance, but during a time in which you had obligations. So I think that's pretty important to understand that we're not fishing, right? That it has to be all within the same time frame. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I'm going back to the hotel example again, like, so if somebody who's chaperoning in Michigan and posting on social media about their cannabis use, that could potentially, that would be.
That would be because
That's an obligation to the school district, correct?
Thank you.
Could you expand a bit on illegal drugs? So somebody gets arrested for cocaine use, not at the school, they weren't involved in any school function, but they're a district.
that would be employee conduct or handled under another section of policy.
Thanks, but we do have a way of addressing it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I guess last question is, we did not have this policy before.
We did not.
What were we doing without this policy around drug testing?
A paragraph that's in the handbook.
Okay.
So it was addressed through the handbook.
And would this require any changes to the handbook?
It would require a mirroring of the language in the handbook. And that would be pretty much with any of the HR policies that come forward, because in the absence of policy, the district has created the handbook. So that's kind of what we're going back to and filling in those with WASB policy that matches and reflects in the handbook.
Julie, when you bring back 522.1, is the essence of that going to be the same, the drug-free workplace then?
It is, and there's a lot of overlap between the two. WASB did not identify 522.1 as a revision. Their sample policies are quite lengthy in comparison to ours. So that's the part where we'll need to analyze the overlap. So the policy may come back significantly longer than it is. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. If there's nothing else, then we will hear about this again in the future. Thank you. All right, then we're going to go to the school safety plan. Mark. Or Greg, did you want to introduce it?
All right.
Mark.
Mark.
Mark can.
This is an item of information, so we'll bring this back to you guys again at the next board meeting for you to take action on. But essentially what it is as a result of Act 143 safety grants and the Office of School Safety, part of the Department of Justice, is we're required to collect a whole bunch of documents to ensure that our schools are prepared, right? So we have all of our emergency contacts and checklists, our threat assessment plans, our safety checklists. We're required to perform all these tasks and then share it with the Department of Justice, Office of School Safety once a year. So they can ensure we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing. One piece of the puzzle is to review this with the school board annually to make sure that you have eyes on it as well. So that's all this is. It's very simple. All of our sites do all of these forms and checklists and emergency procedures. And then we verify that they have them all. We share them with the state, and we're also sharing them with you. So at the next school board meeting, we'll just ask that you approve that all of these documents have been collected, and we'll be good for another year. And if you ever want to see any of these, historically we have shared with the school board the documents themselves, and it's quite the stack. So this year we felt maybe the checklist would be more appropriate. And if you ever wanted to review the documents themselves or have a sample, we'd be happy to provide that opposed to each and every school safety checklist.
I like the checklist.
Yeah, me too.
It's a little easier to wade through.
Yeah.
I do want to add, though, that every check you see means we have taken school safety seriously. Every check you see is a lot of work that goes into that one check mark. As a district, we've been very proactive. We were doing many of these things before Act 143 came through. We continue to work closely with Appleton Police Department and Grand Chute Police Department around school safety, and feel like, you always want to do more, but we certainly do a lot to keep our students and our staff safe every day at school.
I just have a couple of quick questions. First off, maybe I'll regret this later, but I am interested in seeing a sample, maybe even of like an elementary school and then a high school. Maybe I'm not going to read every single word, maybe, but it'd be nice to, I would appreciate that. And then I'm guessing the like school safety assessment, that Act 143, it says on that last bullet point, the most recent date on which the school board or governing body consulted with local law enforcement to conduct required on-site safety assessments. I'm guessing you've been doing that with the SROs. And is that going to be like a challenge? Like, I guess I'm just looking at that bullet point and thinking, well, there's like 20 some schools. Do they need a date for each of those schools?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so it's all tracked by school code.
Okay.
It's not tracked by the Appleton area school district, so each site has to be compliant. So that school safety assessment audit checklist that's in purple on mine, that lists the SRO that went on the walkthrough with them. So, and that's dated. So that lists that is our most recent consult with law enforcement. They walk our buildings with the principal and the maintenance staff, and they just go through the whole thing to make sure that it's, as safe as it can be.
And then I'm guessing that basically what Act 143 is kind of doing in practical terms is just adding another step for something that you already have been doing in most cases, which is like collecting and submitting that documentation to the state. you say that's accurate?
I would say it is for the Appleton area school district. We have already been doing many of these things. I don't know that that's the case statewide. But it's kind of a stipulation of using the grant money is you get this money, but then you have to prove that you're doing the right things, right? So that's kind of how this came to be.
I just have like, I think this is great, but I have the term unfunded mandate coming through. And basically, this is a great piece of legislation to have. But what, you know, the concern with unfunded mandates is the additional time without additional resources. But to me, it sounds maybe minimal. I don't know if you would say that is not true, but because you've already been, I don't know, what do you think?
And I can respond a little bit. I would say that going forward, it's fairly minimal because we've always collected this. So as a principal, you did all of these different pieces either in spring of the year, over the summer, and you had your entrance control plan ready. You had your emergency management team, and it always had to be submitted to the district anyway. Now it just also goes to the state. And, you know, sadly, this Act 143 came out of the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And so the challenge was more of the training that had to go on initially. So we had to train staff members on threat assessments, and that took a lot of time. We had to train our behavior response team members as well. And the challenge has been to keep that updated. So as far as the paperwork, the documentation, that's not as difficult as turnover of staff. And now, okay, who's had the training, who hasn't had the training. But again, we work closely with our APD and Grand Chute PD, and they provide a lot of training for us. You know, Mark, we do the ALIS training once every 3 years, an actual scenario. And then in between, we do a 45-minute training every year. Do you want to speak to that a little bit as well?
Yeah, exactly. We rotate through all of our schools. So once every 3 years, they get the hands-on scenario-based training. And then the 2 years in between, we have a video prepared that they can watch as part of like staff development leading up to the school year. We try to tackle all this stuff in the beginning of the school year. It seems it would be strange to get your safety training toward the end of the school year, right? So we try to give our teachers and our staff in general all the tools they need right up front.
So just a question. So if there is an active threat at one of our schools, heaven forbid, but it requires obviously a very strong partnership with local law enforcement to help us address that. We're not capable of doing that within the schools. And unfortunately, and I'm sure that's where some of this law comes from, we've seen at times where that's worked well across the country, and we've seen times where it's failed spectacularly and lives have been lost because of that. So and this is just really for information, to what extent are we fully testing that or going through those scenarios? I know we don't want to frighten people, but by the same token, how do we know that we're really prepared when it happens? Because I'm sure at Parkland and I'm sure at Uvalde, they thought they were prepared and they weren't. There was a lot of confusion. People didn't know who was in charge. People didn't know what to do. So how are we addressing what can be very high emotion, obviously very challenging situations that people really know exactly what to do and are really trained both not only in their schools, but also with our law enforcement?
I think, one way to answer that, Ed, is that Appleton has the longest standing relationship with an SRO program in the state. So we have been working hand in hand with Appleton and Grand Chute PD since well before any of us were involved in the school district operations. They continuously train within our buildings. So when we have days off, most recently we used Houdini and Badger for Grand Chute training. So they actually perform their own training within our buildings, so they can become very familiar with the ins and outs of our facilities. We encourage all of our law enforcement officers, not just the SROs, but even the everyone from the Appleton PD to tour our buildings during downtime, right? Not to come and interrupt the school day, but at nights, weekends, whatever, they all have access to our facilities. So they're able to enter and kind of tour the facility on their own to plan if something were to occur. We have fantastic response rates in Appleton. When we do have issues, our law enforcement can react very, very quickly.
A couple of years ago, we made a fairly substantial investment in software that really laid out our facilities, and we're going keeping those up to date to make sure that we had the right maps and the police departments had the right maps. Has that carried forward?
Yep, our CRG mapping is still intact. I actually have a meeting with them later this week to ensure that all of our maps are indeed accurate. And if we did any remodeling, that it'll reflect within that mapping software. All of our law enforcement has that on their mobile devices and in their squad cars, so they can see those maps in real time.
I imagine it would be a large update to all of that as we work through our school building referendum as well.
Yeah, the next 3 years will definitely add, right? As we complete our middle schools, we'll add those additional areas to the maps, and then the same with the high schools and the new school. And yeah, we're dedicated to keeping those maps accurate, because the last thing we want is have someone have poor information.
One of the options we did not take with that was we didn't really have the cameras at the time, but now perhaps after this building referendum, we'll have more of that. It was those maps would also have the ability to tap into real live camera feeds as if they were responding to that. At the time, we just didn't have the facility, so we didn't do that. I'm wondering, are we going to revisit that potentially?
But I think nationally we found that incidents are over so rapidly that it's not necessarily, I guess I'll say, a hostage situation of the 1980s and 90s that we're accustomed to seeing in the movies, right? It's not a diehard situation where we can set up a command center and we can review cameras. You got about 3 minutes to react to these situations and they're over. So tapping into live footage and that, it might seem like a great idea, and maybe it would be a very useful tool in a certain situation, but really our law enforcement trains to react as quickly as they can to the threat, right? So they're moving to the threat as fast as they possibly can in person. They're not going to stand back and wait for more data or more information. They take the information they have and move to the threat as fast as they can. And that's how this the Fox Valley area does it. So
Thank you so much, Mark. That's very helpful.
I have two things. One is, what does the acronym SSIT and TAT teams stand for?
those are our threat assessment teams. So if there is, I guess, the rumors of a threat coming, we have a process for that. And it's a very detailed process, and we've been told by many organizations that it's one of the best, if not the best, in the state. So when information comes through, you gather your threat assessment team, you start checking boxes to see if this threat is credible or not. If the threat is credible, then we move into the next steps. If it's not, then maybe it's just a conversation with that family or with that student, or however it shakes out. That's what that is. It's the threat assessment.
I would hope that at some point, some of what Ed was asking there, I would like to understand a little bit more deeper in each one of these areas, like at a work session, so that I have some familiarity with what is actually happening. To Greg's point earlier, that there's actually a lot of behind the scenes protocols and operations that are actually happening that actually I don't know about, and I think many people in public don't actually know about when things happen. And so I think having some understanding of that as a board member would be beneficial. I think in terms of like when people talk to me on the streets or at home or wherever, that I could say, yes, I understand what the protocols are and what's actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to, as much time as you would allow, because this is a point of pride for us as a district safety work group. We are, like Greg said before, we're pretty well ahead of many other school districts when it comes to being proactive. and ensuring that the threat doesn't make it into our schools. And then if it ever were to, we're very well prepared to react.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that prevention is always key in all of this. And so I appreciate all the hard work that you all put into it, especially from a prevention standpoint rather than an intervention standpoint.
Just to add to that, you had mentioned the scenario. I think you said every 3 years there's the scenario you rotate. And my partner participated in that this year and like didn't have fun. And I don't think the purpose is not to have fun, but it's very, my understanding is very thorough. And I feel like that role play scenario work is what sets people up to know what to do when it happens. And to Ed's point about, we've seen, plans are in place and then something happens and nobody knows what to do. The scenarios, I think, and that's their intent, to go a long way to make sure that people are prepared and rely on muscle memory versus like, okay, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, that's a delicate balance, Nick. We want to make sure we give everyone enough tools, but we don't want to cause any undue anxiety. We don't want to cause anyone to be nervous entering our buildings. We just want to make sure they have the right tools. So we choose those scenarios carefully, right? To make sure we do multiple scenarios. We do several different kinds, so you know how to react in different situations, right? If you're in class, if you're in the hallway, if you're at a large scale event, whatever. But it's a little bit of a balance there because we're not all wired the same and we all react differently to these situations. So the last thing we want to do is cause our staff to have undue anxiety, but we do want them to be prepared. So kind of a little give and take there.
Thank you. So it sounds like we'll, at a future time, the board work session, we can get some more specific information about our safety initiatives. So thank you. Okay, then we did have one item removed for separate consideration tonight, and that would be the next year's school calendar. Circling back to that topic, I think there's some interest in trying to actually approve the student calendar and then at a later date, the actual determination where we'd come back with where those professional days will reside. Is that the case? Yeah. So would there be, do we want more discussion about that, or is someone willing to make a motion that we would approve the proposed student calendar? Then will need to be revisited for the educator professional development days.
I'll move to approve the school student calendar as presented this evening.
Okay, any discussion, questions, comments?
I guess the only question I had was, it's my understanding that the intent of the calendar as it was presented is essentially, given the constraints of the way the calendar falls, where the holidays fall, was to keep it as close to what we did in the previous year as possible. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, so we still use the survey data from previous years as to where conference compensation days were placed, where spring break was placed, where the last day of school was placed. And so that's very consistent with this current year calendar, last year's calendar as well. The challenge is always, just responding to where Labor Day is really and working from there. But certainly it makes sense for us to, if you're comfortable with it, approve the student calendar so we can move forward with that. And then, maybe it would make sense for us to bring back all the different employee calendars so you could see them, because HR does build different employee calendars once the student calendar is set.
And then I don't know if this is really relevant, but I'm curious about it anyways. We made a significant change last year, moving from the half day or from the late starts to the full days. Have we received feedback from staff, parents, community on that change?
We will be doing a survey now that today was our third full day PD. So we'll be surveying both staff and parents. We want to survey staff soon because we can still use that feedback on the PDs in second semester. For the families, we wouldn't change anything, but certainly can use it in future calendars. So yes, we will be surveying.
So I am needing some clarification. If we can just look for an example, September of 2024, September 30th, Monday, September 30th would be is in the proposed draft. It was shown as a PD day, which then would be a no school day for students. So how helpful is it if we don't really have all the, how, if we just approve the students, if we didn't need a professional development day there, the students would be in school.
They could be in school, yes.
Or, I mean, it's not a no school day.
We could have school that day if we would like, yes. We don't need the minutes. So where the 174 days are, they're placed such that we have additional minutes if there's inclement weather days and we have to cancel school. But we certainly could move a PD day for we could trade a PD day for a school day. That doesn't help us. Our challenge is we can't fit any more PD days between September first day of school and the last day of school, unless we were to put one in a vacation day.
So if we're trying to, for planning purposes for families, to approve the student calendar at this point, is it going to be misleading? Could there be changes within the school year?
No, we wouldn't change that. The only
Okay.
thing that we need to confirm is where are the professional development days for educators? And so we wouldn't do anything with the student calendar. The one day in question would either go the second week of June, in that third week of August where it currently is, or it would go during winter break on the 23rd of December, unless there's any other ideas as to where that one PD day could go. So that's really the issue, is where we're pretty solid on 187 of the 188 professional educator days. We just aren't comfortable with where that one day would go.
I'm gonna ask
But
you
it
that-
won't impact students at all.
Okay, so then we would be approving where there are professional development days within the school student calendar, those would stay.
They would stay, yes.
Okay, just
Yes.
because we're not really talking about coming back with or having more discussion on all of the other professional development days. It's really one.
One day.
Okay.
So given that discussion, Chris, can I ask you to kind of restate your concern?
Couple of concerns. The shortening of the summer. I would appreciate having input from staff as to what they would prefer. Because I think that's an important piece. I think it affects morale. Also affects ability for people to work during the summer. It eliminates one more week of their, and that may affect educators, it may affect paraprofessionals, other ASU employees. So those are some of my concerns. And then I am really interested in too, how is this calendar working for families? Do they like it better? Or do they have suggestions? So by approving a calendar for this year, we wouldn't have that input. I can understand that we might want to ask for it at the end of the year. In some of the previous years, we've also had the calendar presented, and then we've had 2 weeks in between in order to, to give it some thought. So I would appreciate that opportunity as well. Because I understand that it's a very unusual year, and I can see where looking at December 23rd is a challenge, but looking at that, given what teachers have put into preparing for their classes and their classrooms, that really is shortening up the summer. And it is a lot of staff development front loaded, which I understand is important, but I also, at some point too, is it overload?
Yeah, I understand that. I'm wondering if it might be giving a little bit, if we do the student calendar, it sounds like we might not be able to address everything that you're bringing up, and maybe getting some false hope that things might change that are not really flexible.
One thing we could do is we could survey staff. This is done today. Again, that's our biggest issue, is getting it out to staff. What are the school days for next year? And to families, what are the school days next year? We could survey the staff educators. They're the ones impacted. Where would they prefer to have this 180th day? In August, over winter break, or the Monday coming back in June? Maybe there's another option we haven't thought of. We certainly, but I don't know that administration feels that we, have any one of these are better than another in terms of professional development. We kind of like the August, because with sixth graders moving into the middle school, we thought there's additional work that might go on. And then with the new reading materials and practices in K1, 2, and even into 3, 4, 5, that maybe the day in August would be better placed. But I don't know that we, as administrators, have real strong feelings. Sherry, I see that you're on again. Anything that I'm missing around the options that were considered? We don't love the June, because we've surveyed staff and that came back, no, they did not want to go into the second week of June. The winter break one would be Monday, the 23rd. So that's tough for families that want to travel, their families that want to travel. So we felt like the August was the best of 3 not very good options, I guess.
Sherry, you're muted. Sherry, I think you're muted. Oh. You tried? Oh, no. Can't hear you on.
Well, let me say this, 2 weeks, while we like to get this information out as quickly as possible. I don't think 2 weeks more or less is going to impact our parents or our families or our staff. So if people are more comfortable waiting 2 weeks, perhaps we get a little feedback, survey the staff. I'm happy to withdraw my motion, and we can revisit this on the next December meeting if it makes people a little more comfortable. I don't think it's absolutely urgent that it gets done tonight.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if moving one day here, there, or elsewhere really addresses the kind of concerns that you're kind of bringing up.
I guess looking at what staff did this year, they had a full week before Labor Day. And I think Sherry may have mentioned that you had some comments that was a lot of PD.
Yeah, 5 days, and then we have 2 days. It's a lot, the 5 days in a row.
So as Greg mentioned, for the very reasons of why we wanted to put it in the front end was a lot of transitions with our sixth grade planning, the new reading and some of the training that will need to happen. It would allow for that. When I followed up with the administrators on the work group team, they felt if we had an opportunity to have some staff orientation, have some training, plan out those days in a different way than we've had in the past with 2 days and then 4 days, they felt that that would be better received by staff. So lots of discussion around that. We did have an opportunity last year to have that day after, and it was June 5th in the calendar, if you recall previously. It was very hard to determine the different professional development opportunities and what that looked like. And that was a challenge too. So we have qualitative data on, did that go very well? And knowing the training that we're going to have with some of the reading and with middle school, it wouldn't work that well to do it at the end of the school year. It works better to front load at the beginning. It's really one day that it's really hard to figure out a place to put it in the calendar, and where it could go. Because it only can go in a place where right now there is no school in order to keep with the required minutes. Yeah. So it's either has to be on the front end, the back end, or December 23rd. And maybe surveying staff would be what we would want to do to give them that opportunity to kind of share where they would want it.
Although in general, families don't like to start prior to Labor Day. And I know staff and families don't like to end after the first Friday in June. So I understand there's downsides to everything, but I don't know what you do. You only have so many days to try to get everything to fit.
The other thing too is, which we will come forward in terms of what our dates for summer school are. So there's a domino effect to all of that as you move it into that second week of giving a break. This year, we don't have a break in between summer school, and we're needing to manage that. So if staff are needing to come in on June 9th, then we also, for families, they really want to finish before that 4th of July week. So our data in all of the different surveys that we had, even like we did one in 21, 22, but previous to that, because I was on the calendar committee in my previous role, has always really has said that it really hasn't changed. They really wanted to finish in that first week of June. Where we kept the compensation days has really been pretty consistent about where we have those. The difference now that's different than we've had in the past is our professional development days and where they fall. Our families did tell us those professional development days, they did prefer full days. I know it was a year and a half ago of when we did survey them before we shifted to full day. They did share overwhelmingly that they preferred full days. And I think we need to go through more, like almost a full calendar year of professional development days to really get some input from families on how that felt for them. Because we've had them on either a Friday, now we just had one as a Monday. So I feel that they need to kind of see how it all plays out for a full year. So we might benefit from getting some information from our staff now, but we would really benefit from getting input from our families after almost a full year, and give us that would give us some good information going into the following year. I've already projected ahead about where we would be, thinking about what the calendar will look like the following school year. And going back to that question, it would be 11 weeks. So we've talked about the 10-week, the 11-week. One year it was 12 last year, so it really fluctuates. with a calendar that's the world's calendar. It's the calendar that we deal with. Monday, September 1st, is Labor Day next year, that year. So I've thought about, like, how does this play out every year? And sometimes there's things that are not in our control.
So I have a potentially naive question and then a suggestion. So do we have to have this professional development day?
So how it came about is the educator contract's 188 days. So this would be the 188th day. And we used to have the equivalent of 190 days, but 5 of those days were where you did your own professional development and you documented those 40 hours. And just through years of staff not valuing those hours, not wanting those, this was a compromise 2 years ago to go to 188 days and no longer do the 40 points. So it's part of the contract.
Yeah, I guess my suggestion would be that we kind of table this and do the survey of the staff. I think that potentially would be valuable.
As I say, I'm fine tabling it. It's always good to ask. I'm just not sure what we're gonna hear. Calendar and the days lay out the way they lay out. There's sometimes you just have to do the best you can with the parameters you have in front of you.
Yeah, I think we may end up in the same place, but at least hopefully the staff may feel like they at least had a voice in it that maybe they didn't before.
I mean, the work has been done with, there's a committee.
Correct. There's a
Okay.
work group.
It's work group, and there are educators on the work group.
There are 2 representatives from the association that represent the educators.
Okay. But to hear directly from staff members, maybe you would widen that survey, or present a survey just relating to the.
The
position of
suggestion
the-
was made that it could be done, so.
Yeah, right. I was just clarifying what we are talking about survey, not families at this point, not about full day PD versus any of that, just where do you want that day to go? For some more input.
I appreciate all the work. I know I served on the calendar committee several years, so I know it's always tricky. But I just am hoping that, that the voices will be heard and that then we can. It may end up in the same place, but it will be good to know that people had a voice. So thank you for considering that.
So we had a motion on the table. First, we have a motion on the table. So now, I'm looking to see who made the motion.
I made the motion. I'm happy to withdraw my motion or table it, or does it have to be voted down and to look to our rules of order?
Who seconded it?
I seconded it. Yeah, but I don't know the technicalities of, we have to vote on it.
But again, the vote, or I'm sorry, the motion was on the student calendar, which can be completely separate from the educator because the student calendar isn't going to change.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It was then I started asking about what about the PD days during the school year, but those.
Right. So
Would
the
not change. Okay.
calendar administration, we had questions about whether the calendar actually is board related or is it an operation? But we did bring it here, but there is no like state law to this. So you can do whatever you want as a board around this motion and voting on the calendar. So there is no need to think about what is protocol, I guess.
So my original motion was for the student calendar, just to reiterate.
Okay, so where is it at? Do we have a motion for this to approve the student calendar in a second? I mean, that is what we currently have. Okay. Just in summary,
So then,
legislation says we cannot start school before Labor Day unless we have we have a variance or something. We have to get not a variance,
A
that's
waiver.
a waiver. That's a building thing, a waiver families don't want to go into the second week in June. And we need 174 days of instruction. And we want a winter break and we want a spring break. And so those things just seem to lay out. Okay.
And then to clarify what you were saying, Greg, was that regardless, the days between September 1st and the end of the school year would not change.
That's correct. They would not change.
And this hypothetical survey that we're talking about is really just the placement of that one single day.
Correct.
Okay, so where should we, any other discussion? Nick?
Yeah, basically, like, I just want to make sure we're all understanding what we're doing right now. Because for a moment, we were talking about like not voting on this at all and giving it another 2 weeks. And I don't know, like, are we all comfortable with voting now on the student calendar only? And if not, what are the ways we can stop the vote, or like what are our options, because we do have a motion and second?
Kayla, are you a Robert's Rules expert?
I believe Ed can withdraw his motion. Right?
I think so, yes.
Since there doesn't seem to be enough consensus, I will respectfully withdraw my motion until the next meeting.
Does the second have to be withdrawn or not?
I will withdraw my second as well.
So we do not have a motion on, okay. And we're not voting on that because it's really never happened. Okay, then in 2 weeks, we're not doing any action on this, and then it'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll just then be able to know where those professional development days will reside.
That gives us enough time to gather that information, the survey.
Okay, so then that'll be the December 8th meeting.
Sorry,
Yes.
do you think you will hear from any families or staff being like, well, hey, where's the calendar? Like within these next 2 weeks?
We hear from them all the time. 2 months ago, 6 months ago, family's got a wedding coming up. We're thinking about planning it here. And so we try to get it done usually in November, December. That's always reasonable. So yeah, we might get a call, but that's fine. It really is usually in this time frame. I think that we always get it done. So we won't be too far behind if we go out to December.
Okay, looks like we're good with that. All right. Next meeting. Oh, it's December 11th is the next meeting. Okay, wonderful. Then with that, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you and have a good night.